Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and I have 3 words for you. Kyogre is back. Kyogre used to be a top meta pick in the Master League in years past, but unfortunately time, power creep, and nerfs kind of made it fall by the wayside. But I'm here today to say Kyogre has never been more back this season in the Master League. The moveset you're going to want to run is Waterfall, Avalanche, and Legacy Origin Pulse. With the big rework to Waterfall giving it way better energy generation, Kyogre now has pretty good coverage, it has significantly better pacing, and I went on an absolute tear with it in the Master League to almost break 2600 elo. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in Game 1 we do pick up a bit of a negative lead, Kyogre into Keldeo. Now here, unfortunately I do overtap just a little bit with the Kyogre, getting a few Waterfalls before I end up sending in a Reshiram. Now you'll notice for this first game, my Reshiram is on Stone Edge. For this team, you do want to run Draco Meteor, and for the other 9 battles, I did TM away Stone Edge. Because not having Draco Meteor does make the Keldeo matchup quite uncomfortable. However, my opponent tries to catch the Draco Meteor that I do not have onto their Zamazenta, and Zamazenta takes critical damage from Fusion Flare. Now I can send in Kyogre, and Kyogre is going to get such a massive energy head start. Zamazenta will get a close combat, but I'm very comfortable absorbing that damage because I can exit with a ton of energy. They actually end up going for the Behemoth Bash there, so they don't want to lower their defense. They tried to make it to another move, but they weren't able to get there. Origin Pulse forces a shield from Keldeo, in comes Xerneas, and in the back, my opponent has Zacian. So, in theory, I've had pretty atrocious alignment this entire game. There was a Keldeo walling off the Kyogre, and my Xerneas is answered with the Zacian. However, with a shield advantage, I'm actually in a position where I should be able to win this game. Zacian fires off the Behemoth Blade, I can farm up just shy of the back-to-back close combats. With the energy that I have on Kyogre, I should be in a spot to win. Close combat will take the knockout, back in comes Keldeo. Keldeo will fire off the Secret Sword, but I can put up the shield, fire off the close combat. I'm on very low HP, but just enough to make it to the move. And once I do that, I can switch into Kyogre. It's going to be a race that Kyogre is going to win. This new pacing is wicked. Origin Pulse may be resisted, but it's a busted move. Down goes Keldeo, and that's a good game. We get the Dream Lead in the next match, Kyogre into Landorus. Landorus did get buffed this season with Mudshot. My opponent save switches into Zekrom, and here I make a pretty big misplay. Against the Zekrom save switch, I should throw 1 Waterfall and then bring in the Xerneas. If you throw 2 Waterfalls, then it actually makes your pacing slightly uncomfortable in this matchup. Since Zekrom has such a big energy head start, the Zekrom can actually shield and look to make a play for switch advantage. However, considering that Kyogre is significantly more flexible than it's ever been, I'm actually pretty okay with giving up switch advantage, because even if they have something like a Palkia in the back, Kyogre honestly does pretty okay now. I'm going to shield up, I have to respect the potential outrage from my opponent, but they're on Crunch. It's going to be close, but they don't get Crunch number 2. Back in comes the Landorus. I'm never going to be going for the Fusion Flare here, I'm going for the home run shot. Draco Meteor is going to land, picking up the one-hit knockout, and it is Palkia in the back. Now this used to be the game over matchup for Kyogre, it had absolutely no play. But let me introduce you to new Kyogre. Avalanche is able to 2-shot the Palkia, I'm already at another Avalanche, and guess what? Even though they have the Spatial Rend, I don't get KO'd here. I survive, I make a second Avalanche, and by forcing that final shield, I should now be in a spot where I can close out this game. You may notice that I do have a new Reshiram. I built a new Reshiram specifically with 15 defense because this means that Palkia no longer Dragon Breath breakpoints me, and that actually wins me this game because my opponent makes the Aqua Tail, but my Reshiram is outside of Aqua Tail range because I don't take as much damage from Dragon Breath as my poor defense Reshiram used to. So I hang on, knock out Palkia with the Fusion Flare, and take the win. We move to game number 3, and we see a pretty familiar lead, Kyogre into Keldeo. This time, I'm able to switch immediately into the Reshiram, no accidental overtaps, and this is going to work out a lot better for Reshiram. If Keldeo stays in, that usually means they don't have a great answer to a Reshiram up energy, so I like farming up to the Draco Meteor, but going for the Fusion Flare bait. Even if they no shield, a resisted Fusion Flare still does quite a lot of damage, but if they end up shielding, then I can actually just win the ones by getting the Flare shielded into connecting with the Draco Meteor. Now my opponent has a very uncomfortable choice. They have to give up both shields, or they have to give up the Keldeo. So I full send the Draco Meteor, down goes Keldeo, and I'm able to win switch. My opponent will get to bring in Palkia and farm all the way down, but that's not going to be a problem, because I'm running the Fairy type on this team that actually beats dragons, and that is Xerneas. You may notice I don't really run a lot of Zacian, and that is by design, because Zacian doesn't really beat the good dragons. Zacian struggles into Palkia, it loses to Reshiram, and it loses to Zekrom, where Xerneas has winning matchups into all of them. My opponent does make a nice catch. They're able to catch the close combat, saving the Palkia and catching it onto the Zacian. But unfortunately, with a little bit of chip damage onto their Zacian, they're now in a ton of trouble against my Kyogre. I'm able to farm them into a range where Avalanche would threaten a knockout, and the fact that they haven't thrown any energy means that they kind of have to give up a shield. And Kyogre is just in a completely winning position from here on out. They fire off the close combat, I no shield, they make it to close combat number 2, but now I can put up the shield, the waterfall KOs, and I exit with the Avalanche loaded. So they were able to save that Palkia, but we are making a habit of knocking out Palkias with Avalanche. Kyogre takes down Palkia, and we get another win. We move to the next match, picking up a slightly favorable lead, leading Kyogre into Xerneas. My opponent save switches into Zekrom, and I decide to throw 3 before sending into Xerneas. Now this is a pretty big misplay again in my eyes. Ideally as the Kyogre, you want to throw 1 waterfall and then send into Xerneas. This was my first day of playing the Master League, obviously, since the Master League just rotated in quite some time, so I didn't quite have the timings down for when to switch stuff in, but if you do see that Zekrom save switch, throwing 1 waterfall and then pivoting will be best. Fortunately, I do get a really nice undercharge there, and that's going to put me in a pretty good spot. Now, as they bring back in their Xerneas, I'm only 1 off the Moonblast. Moonblast connects for big damage, and I can pivot aggressively into Kyogre. My opponent stays in, so I wait the turn, ensuring there's no catch, and I fire off the Avalanche. Avalanche is going to force a shield from the Xerneas. I'm just going to let this go because I know that I do survive a Moonblast. In the back, my opponent reveals they have Reshiram. Unfortunately, I'm unable to make it to the Origin Pulse, but an Avalanche will still hit for some very solid neutral damage. Avalanche is going to be no shielded. They're holding on to that Final Protect shield, and now it comes down to this. I bring in the Reshiram, switch into the Xerneas, and get the game-winning catch. Xerneas catches the Fusion Flare bait. I bring in my Reshiram. They're reaching for the Draco Meteor, but they cannot get there. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We move to the next match, leading Kyogre into Reshiram. This is a pretty neutral matchup. If the Reshiram does have Draco Meteor, things can get a little bit uncomfortable. But the nice thing is Kyogre can outpace and make a charge attack before they can make a Draco. An Avalanche will do quite a lot of damage or pressure a shield off my opponent. I'm able to get a shield. Waterfall has already gotten them to half HP, and I'm just going to no shield. If they Draco me, they're going to be -2 and they're going to have to pivot out, but they don't. Instead, they fire off Crunch. I save Kyogre, pivot into my own Reshiram, and I know that they're only running Crunch, so I'm never really going to be shielded in the first. However, they do have a massive energy head start, and that's going to pressure a shield. My opponent's probably not going to want to concede a farm down, so they will pivot out, and they send in Palkia. I try and throw the Draco Meteor on 8. I don't know if that was my error or if the game overtapped me, but unfortunately, it forces me to play to a CMP tie that I do not win. I thought I only threw 8 there, but unfortunately, we do not get that charge move, and losing that energy does put me in a pretty negative spot. Palkia is going to get to land Aqua Tails onto the Xerneas, and that does do a significant amount of damage. I'm going to return fire with the close combat. They're low enough that I should be able to secure the KO, and I am debuffed on my defense, so I'm going to need to pivot out. My opponent sends in their own Xerneas, I fire off the Moonblast, and then I'm switching out so I can reset this defense drop. Moonblast does get the shield, in comes Kyogre, and if I'm able to land an Origin Pulse, I can win the game. So I will put up the shield, my opponent goes for the close combat, I go for the Origin Pulse, and they catch. Oh no, they were at -2 defense. I probably could have just Avalanched there, but instead I go for the Origin Pulse. I don't wait the turn because they had the close combat banked, and unfortunately, I think that's going to cost me. Well, unless this Avalanche KOs. Avalanche lands, and they survive on 1 HP. That was such a winnable game, but my opponent got the catch. I should have just waited the turn and fired off the Avalanche, because even an Avalanche landing on a -2 Xerneas would have just been game winning. Well, Xerneas returns in the next match, this time on the lead, and hopefully this game will go a little bit better. I really feel like we were in the driver's seat of that one, but it was entirely operator error. I really felt like in every game that I played with this team, I ended up going 8-2 overall. All 10 games were winnable. Unfortunately, I feel like I had 2 pretty catastrophic throws in the 2 losses. In this game, my opponent's bringing out some spice, but unfortunately, Shadow Garchomp, I think Master League is somehow the league where it is going to perform the worst. Just because the stat product of everything in the Master League is so incredibly high. It lands in Earth Power, but I'm a Xerneas, not a Zacian. I'm able to comfortably survive that. They end up shielding the close combat. I make it to a second close combat. And now they've lost switch advantage, they've lost both of their shields, and the moment my switch timer's up, I'm pivoting into Reshiram. Reshiram up 2 shields into Kyogre, this game is over. All I have to do is just fire off the Draco Meteor in the middle of their waterfall to ensure that they can't get the catch. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. Kyogre caught mid-waterfall, unable to get the catch, and this is the Draco Meteor. That's going to be good night to Kyogre. Back in comes the Xerneas. My attack is now at -2, which means that my Fusion Flare not going to hit nearly as hard as it typically would be, but either way I can just switch out to reset the debuff. So I pivot into the Xerneas. I don't get a catch or anything, but now my Fusion Flare is back to full power. Xerneas can fire off energy, but Reshiram has a Fusion Flare and a shield, and that's going to end the game. I know it's very early days into this new Master League meta, but I had a lot of fun in today's games. I pretty much ran this team until I ran out of Qs and then was forced to go into Jungle Cup, but man, it felt like a very enjoyable start to this meta with a lot of flexible play. Kyogre into Xerneas in the next match. We've seen this lead before, and we know it's a pretty nice one for Kyogre. Xerneas doesn't even build up to the Moonblast. They're just going to fire off the close combat. They just want chip damage. They close combat. They're going to mirror with the Shadow Hundo Kyogre. Oh my goodness, what a flex. I'm going to be sending in Reshiram, but Reshiram down energy is actually going to kind of struggle here. I put up the shield as Kyogre will go for the Avalanche, and now I have a very tricky call to make. Draco Meteor versus Fusion Flare. I opt to go for the bait. Fusion Flare does get the shield, and that is a pretty big swing of momentum over to me. By getting that shield call right, I should now be able to Dragon Breath them into a range where I can knock them out with a Fusion Flare. My opponent tries for a catch onto a Shadow Garchomp, but unfortunately, I have the reaction time. We go for the Draco Meteor, picking up the 1-hit KO, and the Shadow Garchomp gets absolutely destroyed. Back in comes Shadow Kyogre to be immediately hit with the Fusion Flare. Fusion Flare takes the knockout, they send in the Xerneas, and I can just switch back into my loaded Kyogre. And now my opponent doesn't really have a way out. My Kyogre is able to grab the final shield. I can threaten an Origin Pulse and only one more Waterfall, and that forces him to fire off energy. And then I just have the healthier Xerneas. They're in Moonblast range, I'm not, so I bring in my Xerneas. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We move to the next match, picking up a very nice lead, Kyogre into Groudon. Groudon did get buffed this season as well, with his fast move Mud Shot now getting a little bit of extra energy in exchange for less damage. They save switch into Shadow Claw here in black, and I respond with the Xerneas. I have to respect the free shock, but unfortunately my opponent does end up going for a Fusion Bolt bait. That is not what I was hoping to see. Getting that bait call wrong now puts me in a bit of an awkward spot. This is a very rare moment where Zacian would actually be better than Xerneas, because Zacian does not have to fear a free shock, and therefore would never have to shield the first. I'm pretty confident my opponent has doubled up at this point, so I'm just going to let this go, and just go for a massive farm with Reshiram. Because Reshiram should be able to land a Draco Meteor onto the Groudon and take the knockout. They fire off free shock, they're going to pivot into the Groudon, and I'm actually able to save that Reshiram for later, and instead bring in Kyogre. Kyogre is going to take some pretty significant damage from Precipice Blades. Precipice Blades is going to get me very low. My opponent's actually on Dragon Tail, so they're not running Mud Shot. Here, I do make a bit of a misplay. I should have gone for the double up. I instead did not double up, I'm one short, and that means when my opponent brings in their final Pokemon, which is Marshadow, I'm unable to get the Avalanche. However, I can still win if I land the Draco. If I farm up, I go for the Draco right away, and they catch it onto Kyurem, and that instantly loses me the game. What a terrible misplay from me. This was the only other game that I lost with this team, and both times it was to not waiting turns, throwing the charge attack as soon as I got it, and my opponent just making devastating catches. I don't think that's the team's fault that I lost that game. That was entirely my fault as the operator of the team. We move to the next match, looking for some redemption as we get the exact same lead once again. Kyogre into Groudon. This Groudon is not pivoting out. They're staying in, taking massive damage with Waterfall, and this Groudon is actually on Mud Shot. They fire off the Precipice Blades, I put up the shield, and my opponent safe switches into Lunala. Lunala has incredible neutral matchups, but Kyogre is up a ton of energy. And considering that I was still pretty healthy as well, I shouldn't be in a range where my opponent can actually threaten a knockout with Shadow Ball. So I no shield, they fire off the Shadow Ball, I survive, I make the Origin Pulse, and this new pacing on Kyogre is just so awesome. Origin Pulse gets the final shield, now I can send in Reshiram. And I don't know if there's a Pokemon that ever wants to be up energy more than Reshiram in the Master League. I'm up energy, and I'm up a shield. My opponent sends in the Groudon. I could go for the Draco, but I think I've done enough damage that I can actually knock out with the Fusion Flare. So I fire off the Flare, it barely KOs, in comes Lunala. Lunala's getting KO'd by the Fusion Flare, and this Reshiram is just taking over. Fusion Flare taking back-to-back knockouts. Their final Pokemon is revealed to be an Ice Fang Zamazenta. And unfortunately for the Zamazenta, they just do not have the pacing that Xerneas does. By switching immediately, Xerneas makes the double close combat before they get their back-to-back Behemoth Bash, and that is going to seal it. So Xerneas taking down a Pokemon that's pretty difficult for it, but Kyogre, my opponent being ABA weak to it, really put me in a strong position for success. Hopping to the final match, we get Kyogre into Groudon one final time. My opponent safe switches into Zacian, and I'm going to throw 2 waterfalls and then send in the Reshiram. Now that is actually by design. If you get a little bit of damage onto the Zacian, then suddenly it makes the matchup way cleaner for the Reshiram. To my surprise, my opponent here is actually on Play Rough Zacian. I'm not a big fan of Play Rough Zacian. I think that Zacian, if it's run, should probably run the standard moveset, which is the Behemoth Blade and the Close Combat. Although, realistically, if we're being very honest, I would prefer Xerneas over any moveset on Zacian. My opponent should try for the snipe here, and they do, but I'm able to bank that Fusion Flare for later. Having that banked means I basically just have a delete button for Zacian. They have energy, but I have that move loaded. Avalanche gets the Groudon low. They're going to hit me back hard with the Precipice Blades, but I survive and get the Waterfall down. My opponent cannot afford to send in the Zacian. They're going to have to send in Kyurem White. This is actually an Ice Fang Kyurem White, which is a pretty big surprise considering this is the 2500s. Kyurem White should basically always be running Dragon Breath because of how strong Dragon Breath is. But either way, it's really not going to matter. Even if they had Dragon Breath, this game would still be a win because I have Xerneas, and Xerneas has a very good matchup. They go for their only win con, which is going for the Ice Burn on the CMP tie. Close Combat takes the knockout, and then I can bring in the Reshiram. I survive the Metal Claw on very low HP to make the Fusion Flare. Fusion Flare knocks out Zacian, and that is a good game. Man, every time the Master League gets updated, I'm never quite sure whether I'm going to be a big fan of the Master League meta or not until I end up playing it out. And if this day 1 is any indication, I'm really going to like the Master League this season. Kyogre for many seasons was given the rather unfortunate nickname of the RPS Whale because, well, it had very polarizing matchups. It got completely obliterated by Pokemon like Zekrom and Palkia. It had amazing matchups into the stuff it beat like Landorus and Ho-Oh back when they were both a lot more prominent, and it had a really good matchup into Zacian. However, with all the adjustments they've made with giving it Avalanche last season and now with the rework to Waterfall, Kyogre ends up feeling like a lot more of a neutral presence. It is still going to have some bad matchups, like in the Keldeo matchup, it's walled. Against Palkia, it's still not a super comfortable matchup on even energy, but in my eyes, the definition of flexibility is if you're up a little bit of energy, can you actually flip it? And now, with this new Kyogre, up a little bit of energy, I believe it's up 4 turns, it can actually beat Palkia. And up a little bit of energy, it can do very well into the Zekrom because you're able to make the Avalanche, and my goodness, I'm honestly at a bit of a loss for words because I like Kyogre in a Master League meta. I normally really heavily dislike Kyogre's presence in a meta, but they've reworked it to the point where it's no longer the old clunky RPS whale that either won hard or lost hard. Now it feels a little bit more neutral. It is less fast move pressure, it's more energy focused, and that allows you to reach Origin Pulses quicker. It has Avalanche for coverage into the Dragons, and to me, this is probably the best Kyogre's ever felt in the Master League. And that is very, very exciting. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do help support the channel by leaving a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.